the little girl had not laughed in 312 days. Her mother had watched doctors, therapists, teachers, and toys all fail to bring back the sound that once filled their home. Then one ordinary afternoon, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company opened a security camera recording from her daughter's school and froze. There, on a dusty patch of grass behind the building, her 8-year-old daughter was laughing so hard she could barely stand, and the man making her laugh was a single father the CEO had barely noticed for months. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to our channel so we can keep bringing stories that remind us there is still goodness in the world. Vivian Calder had built her life around control. At 39, she was the founder and CEO of Calder & Rowe, a technology company that had grown from a rented office into one of the most respected firms in the country. Her employees admired her discipline, investors trusted her judgment, and competitors were careful around her because Vivian rarely made mistakes twice. But there was one part of her life she could not manage, no matter how many experts she hired or how many solutions she purchased. Her daughter, Maisie, had stopped laughing. Nearly a year earlier, Maisie had lost her father in a sudden highway accident. The loss had changed the child in ways that no professional could fully explain. She still attended school, still completed her assignments, still ate breakfast and packed her backpack, but the bright little girl who once danced through the kitchen had disappeared behind a quiet face. Vivian had responded the only way she knew how. She worked harder to protect her. She hired specialists, arranged private tutoring, redesigned the house, cancelled unnecessary travel, and filled every empty hour with carefully planned activities. Yet the more desperately Vivian tried to make Maisie happy, the farther away her daughter seemed to drift. One afternoon, Vivian arrived at the private elementary school earlier than usual because a meeting had been cancelled. She was expecting to collect Maisie and take her to another appointment, but before leaving the school office, she noticed the security monitor showing the courtyard. The school had recently installed cameras because of several incidents involving damaged equipment, and the principal had asked Vivian to review footage connected to a complaint. Vivian almost ignored the screen. Then she saw Maisie. Her daughter was sitting on the grass beside a man wearing a faded work jacket. He was kneeling beside a broken wooden cart, holding 2 small wheels in his hands. Maisie suddenly covered her mouth, then burst into laughter. Not a polite smile. Not the little breathy chuckle Vivian had occasionally managed to coax from her. This was real laughter, uncontrolled and bright, the kind that made Maisie bend forward and wipe tears from her eyes. Vivian stared at the screen as though she had forgotten how to breathe. The man was Callum Reed, a maintenance worker hired through a local contractor. He was 36, a widowed single father raising his 9-year-old son, Jasper. Callum was not wealthy, influential, or particularly polished. His work boots were usually dusty, his lunch came in an old metal container, and he drove a battered blue station wagon that had needed repairs more times than he could remember. But Callum possessed something Vivian had spent almost a year searching for in expensive offices: patience without pressure. He had never tried to force Maisie to talk about her father. He had never asked her why she was sad. He had simply noticed what interested her. The security footage continued. Callum had apparently discovered that Maisie liked drawing little inventions in the margins of her schoolwork. That afternoon, he had found a broken cart behind the maintenance shed and asked her to help him turn it into something ridiculous. Together they had transformed it into what looked like a miniature racing machine. Callum had placed a plastic bucket on top as a driver's seat, attached a crooked flag, and then pushed it across the courtyard while making exaggerated racing sounds. Maisie had laughed so hard she had fallen onto the grass. When Jasper appeared, he joined the game, pretending to be a serious racing commentator while his father drove the ridiculous cart in circles. The scene was messy, childish, and completely unplanned. It was also the first time Vivian had seen her daughter genuinely happy in almost a year. But the footage also showed something that unsettled her. Callum noticed Maisie's smile, but instead of celebrating it, he slowed down. He gently put the cart aside and sat on the grass beside her. Maisie's smile faded into something softer. She looked toward the empty part of the courtyard where children were playing. Callum seemed to understand without asking. He stayed beside her until she was ready to stand. There was no performance, no attempt to become a hero. He simply remained there. Vivian felt a complicated wave of gratitude and anger. Gratitude because her daughter had laughed. Anger because a man she barely knew had somehow reached Maisie when all her carefully arranged efforts had failed. She immediately asked the principal who Callum was. The answer surprised her. Callum had been working at the school for almost 6 months, repairing doors, playground equipment, desks, fences, and anything else that broke. He often brought Jasper with him during school holidays because he had no one else to care for his son. He had also quietly repaired several things for students without charging anyone, including a wheelchair ramp that had been causing trouble. Vivian wanted to thank him, but her pride made the moment awkward. She approached Callum the following afternoon with an envelope containing money. She believed she was offering generosity. Callum looked at the envelope, then at her, and quietly refused it. He explained that he had not done anything for Maisie expecting payment. He had simply seen a lonely child because he knew what loneliness looked like. Vivian took his refusal personally. She had spent years solving problems by paying for expertise, and now someone was telling her that the most important thing in her daughter's recovery could not be purchased. Her frustration deepened when she learned that Callum had once applied for a maintenance position at her company and had been rejected after a brief interview. The interviewer had described him as lacking the executive polish expected for the role. Vivian remembered the hiring report and realized she had signed the final approval without ever meeting him. The realization embarrassed her. She had judged a man through a paragraph on a screen, while he had taken the time to understand her daughter without asking for anything in return. Still, Vivian remained suspicious. She worried that Callum might be using Maisie to gain access to her family or company. She quietly asked the school to limit their interaction. Callum accepted the decision without argument. He simply stopped bringing the cart into the courtyard. Maisie noticed immediately. For the first time in months, she became angry. She pushed away her lunch, refused to attend an art activity, and went home carrying the same sadness she had carried for nearly a year. That evening, Vivian sat across from her daughter and realized something painful. She had been so afraid of losing Maisie that she had been trying to control every step of her grief. She had treated sadness like an illness that needed to be eliminated instead of a wound that needed time, patience, and love. When Maisie finally asked why Callum was not allowed to play with her anymore, Vivian did not know how to answer. Her daughter simply looked down and whispered that Callum never made her forget her father. He made her feel like it was okay to remember him and still laugh. Those words broke something open inside Vivian. The next day, she returned to the school. She found Callum repairing a damaged bench while Jasper sat nearby doing homework. Vivian apologized. Not as a CEO, not as a wealthy mother, but as a woman who had been terrified and had made mistakes because fear had convinced her that control was the same thing as love. Callum listened. He did not immediately forgive her, but he accepted the apology. He explained that after losing his wife, he had also tried to make Jasper strong too quickly. He had encouraged his son to stop crying, to keep moving, to be brave. Eventually, Jasper stopped talking about his mother altogether. Callum realized that grief did not disappear when people stopped mentioning it. It simply became quieter. From that day forward, something changed. Vivian stopped scheduling every moment of Maisie's life. She began taking walks with her daughter without an agenda. She listened when Maisie wanted to talk about her father and stayed silent when Maisie did not. She allowed laughter and sadness to exist in the same afternoon. Callum remained part of their lives, but never as a replacement for anyone. He became a friend, someone who understood that healing was not about filling an empty space. It was about learning to live around it. Then came the unexpected turning point. A few weeks later, the school announced a community invention fair. Maisie wanted to enter the silly cart she had built with Callum. Vivian immediately offered to finance a professional version, but Maisie refused. She wanted it to look imperfect because, as she explained, Dad would have liked it that way. Callum helped her rebuild it using recycled wood, old wheels, and leftover materials. Jasper painted the side with crooked flames. Vivian sat on the ground beside them, wearing clothes that were completely unsuitable for a CEO and laughing when the paint ended up on her sleeve. On the day of the fair, hundreds of parents gathered around the school courtyard. Maisie stood beside her strange little invention, nervous but proud. She explained that it was not really a racing cart. It was a machine for making bad days less heavy. Her voice trembled when she mentioned her father. Vivian felt tears gather in her eyes, but she did not interrupt. Callum stood behind the crowd, giving Maisie the space to own her moment. Then Maisie climbed into the cart. Callum pushed her forward. The wheels squeaked. The crooked flag fell sideways. Jasper began making ridiculous racing noises. And Maisie laughed. Vivian heard it clearly. The sound traveled across the courtyard, past teachers, parents, and children, and seemed to reach a place inside her that had been silent for nearly a year. She did not try to record it. She did not try to preserve it. She simply watched her daughter laugh. Later that afternoon, Vivian asked Callum to meet her privately. She told him she wanted to offer him a position at her company, not as charity, not because she felt guilty, but because she had finally learned that his practical intelligence, patience, and ability to solve problems were worth more than polished credentials. Callum accepted only after making sure the job would allow him enough flexibility to remain a father. Vivian agreed without hesitation. Months passed. Callum became known inside the company for solving problems other engineers had overlooked. Jasper and Maisie became inseparable friends. Vivian became a different kind of leader. She still expected excellence, but she stopped confusing perfection with worth. She began asking employees about their families, their struggles, and the things they were trying to protect outside the office. She even changed the company's hiring process so people were evaluated for their actual abilities rather than their appearance, background, or polished resumes. One afternoon, almost a year after Vivian first saw the security footage, she received a small envelope from the school. Inside was a photograph taken during the invention fair. It showed Maisie laughing beside the ridiculous cart, Jasper pretending to steer, Callum holding the back of the machine, and Vivian standing nearby with paint on her sleeve. On the back, Maisie had written a sentence in uneven handwriting: "Mom, you don't have to make everything better. You just have to stay with me." Vivian held the photograph against her chest and cried, not because she was broken, but because she finally understood that healing had never required her to erase the pain. It required her to stop running from it. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Before you go, tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment when someone's simple kindness helped you through a difficult time? Your story might be the hope someone else needs to read today. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson Vivian ever learned. Sometimes we spend years searching for extraordinary answers when what we truly need is an ordinary person willing to sit beside us, share our silence, make us laugh when we are ready, and stay when the laughter disappears again. Callum had not saved Maisie. He had not replaced her father. He had simply reminded her that grief and happiness could live in the same heart. And in the end, that was what saved the entire family, not money, not power, not success, but the courage to stop trying to control love and finally let love do what it had always known how to do: stay.